Good day, everyone. Welcome again to CSA Conversations. I have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Christian Busch, Director of the Global Economy Program at New York University's Center for Global Affairs, where he teaches on purpose-driven leadership, impact, entrepreneurship, social innovation, and emerging markets. He's a visiting fellow in the London School of Economics and the co-founder of Leaders on Purpose, an organization convening high-impact leaders. Dr. Busch is among the important thinkers in our century. He frequently speaks at conferences such as World Economic Forum, TEDx, and the Financial Times Sustainability Summit. In 2018, he received the LCE Department of Management's Teaching Excellence Award for co-creating and co-leading a new course. His book, The Serendipity Mindset, published on Penguin Random House 2020, develops a science-based framework for individuals and companies to help about different topics will be actually discussed today. First of all, welcome again, Dr. Busch.
Thank you so much for having me.
I should be calling you Christian, I think.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much for having this time with us during this speech. I just started reading your book, which is a very, very interesting book about the serendipity. The first time I heard this word, serendipity, I think when I was watching the movie Serendipity many years ago. And there was an explanation about the term, which says fortunate accidents. And I think in your book, you just use uncertainty as a pathway, as a tool to explore how can we actually have a meaningful and more purposeful life by giving the science-based explanations and lots of examples. And then that reminded me, you were talking in the book, because I'm still at the beginning of the book. The first chapter is really interesting when you talk about the brief history of serendipity, the meaning of serendipity. I'm still there. I just remembered late Steve Jobs. He was mentioning, if I'm not wrong, in one of his quotes, that trust the fact that the connecting dots will be an important topic in the future. So you just talk a lot about connecting dots and serendipity and serendipitous experiences. So my first question is, when we focus on your serendipity work, can you first explain what the term is in your book and why it's relevant? And I'm sure you have lots of interesting examples to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes from that idea that, over the last kind of 12 years as community builder, entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, business consultant, and academic, one of the things that I've realized is that, the most successful, purpose-driven, and joyful people, they have something in common, which is that they see something in the unexpected, they see something in uncertainty, and they're able to turn that into opportunity. And so the book is really based on this premise, and the idea of serendipity is really based on the premise that in a fast-changing world, we always want to plan everything, we want to try to do everything in advance, and then the unexpected happens, and we're like, oh my God, what do we do now? And so the idea is, how can we build a muscle for that, for really, creating or in a way finding a way to manage uncertainty? And so serendipity is really about these unexpected, positive moments that then shape our life. The way we like, we find our co-founder, the way we find a business partner, and so on. So imagine the situation. You're in a coffee shop, and if you have erratic hand movements like I do, you spill a coffee. And let's say you spill the coffee over a person next to you, and now you sense, oh my God, there could be something, right? You sense some kind of connection, but you have two options now. Option number one is that you say, oh my God, I'm so sorry, here's a napkin. Then you walk outside and you think, what could have happened had I acted on that unexpected moment? Or the other option is you say, I'm so sorry, I was thinking about X, Y, Z. You start a conversation, and maybe that ends up to be, your love partner or a business partner or something else, because you acted on that unexpected moment. And, when we think in terms of, different examples in business and our personal life, a lot of times actually those unexpected moments shape who we are, what we're doing in life. But also in business, there's a lot of things. Take, for example, the potato washing machine. There was a company in China, the largest in the world, that produced washing machines and refrigerators. And they had calls from farmers, and the farmers said, your washing machines are always breaking down. So they asked, why is it breaking down? Well, we're trying to wash our potatoes in them. And, what would we usually do? We would probably say, well, don't wash your potatoes in our washing machine. It's not made for that. It's made for clothes, right? They did the opposite. They said, you know what, that's unexpected, but there's a lot of farmers in China who might want to actually wash their potatoes. So why don't we build in a dirt filter and make it a potato washing machine? So unexpectedly, that's how the potato washing machine emerged. And that is how up to 50% of inventions, of innovations emerged, that, someone sees something in the unexpected and then connects the dots and do something out of it. And that's, how this fascination came about, that in a way, when we want to be surviving in a fast-changing world and really thrive in a fast-changing world, we need to be able to see something in the unexpected and then turn it into positive outcomes. And so that's really what serendipity is about, to say it's not that kind of blind luck, being born into a good family or inheriting something. It's the smart luck that, to your point, is all about connecting dots. It's about saying, I see that a farmer needs something, or I sense that there could be some kind of connection, but I have to do something with it. I have to connect the dots to something and then actually follow through with it. And so that's what serendipity is about, is the process of seeing and connecting dots, and by this, creating innovation and impact in a fast-changing world.
It's very relevant especially to today's world. But the key I think topic is here is just to take an action and to start connecting the dots. Because many of us, as you say, we complain about lack of resources, we complain about the conditions, situations, the atmosphere, geography, everything just becomes like a complaint matter. But as you say, you can change that. I think it's an important topic in positive psychology as well. Martin Seligman's learned optimism talks about that. How can you actually change the way we think about things and then convert to something else more positive, more optimistic? But isn't it difficult to do that? Like practically, how can an individual develop that muscle?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of exercises we can do, and maybe focusing on two that I found very useful. One is really the hook strategy. So this idea that every situation, every conversation, every interaction, we can use to seed some dots that the other person can connect. So, for example, there's this wonderful entrepreneur in London, Ollie Barrett, and if you would ask him this dreaded "what do you do" question that you get asked at every conference and everywhere, he would say something like, well, I'm a technology entrepreneur, but recently started reading into the philosophy of science, but what I'm really excited about is playing the piano. So what he's doing here is he's giving you 3 potential hooks where you could be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. I've been recently hosting piano matinees, you should come by. Or, my God, such a coincidence, my brother is a philosophy of science professor, you should connect with him. The point here is that we can, in every conversation, seed a little bit of our interests or seed a little bit of the things we're working on, so that other people can be like, oh my God, this relates to this and this. And that's, how a lot of times people find new clients, right? Because unexpectedly, someone might have a brother or a sister who was exactly looking for what it is. But if we don't put these dots out there, serendipity doesn't happen that often. And so the hook strategy is really all about saying, how do we seed a lot of this information out there and make it happen? I'm a big fan of creating a Serendipity Journal, where you essentially, sit down and you think about, what are the areas of interest that I have? Where do I want to go at the moment, and how can I sprinkle this in? But also thinking about, how do I react to the unexpected, and what is holding me back a lot of times? Because, a lot of times we might sense there might be something, but something holds us back. Something is not allowing us to move on it. And so really reflecting on, when are the incidences in my life when I act on something versus when is the incidences were not. And then we can find our own serendipity patterns and then essentially get better at it, and then use some of these exercises. So exercise number 1 is really about this kind of, creating and casting hooks. Another one, especially in companies, that I'm a big fan of is the so-called project funeral, or the post-mortem, where the idea is essentially that usually when something doesn't work out in our communities, in our organizations, in our companies, we try to hide it, right? We try to not talk about it because we don't want to be the loser who kind of messed something up. And so essentially the problem is we don't really learn from each other, because the real learning comes from things that don't work. And so the idea here is that whenever something didn't work, the person who's responsible for it puts it to rest. So in front of people from other divisions, they say, this is what we worked on, this is what we learned from it. So it's not about celebrating failure, it's about celebrating from what didn't, learning from what didn't work. And then they put it to rest, and then they say, okay, that's what we learned from it. And so in one example, there was this company, they produce window frames, window glasses. And, they had this kind of light come in, and the idea was that the technology would allow to not have the light reflect. And, it's an amazing technology, but they realized, what, not a lot of people were going to buy it because it's very costly. Now, they said, okay, we learn from it. Next time we try to understand the market better. Now, someone in the audience goes like, hey, have you considered what this would mean for solar? Have you considered if you take that into a solar device, how amazing it can absorb energy? And that's how coincidentally their solar division partly emerged. The point is that, when they talk about it, they would say, oh, it was just lucky that this person was at the right place at the right time, connecting the dots. No, you know what? You created a practice where you didn't know what would happen, but you knew that something positive would eventually happen because you allow people to connect the dots for each other. And so there's a lot of kind of strategies within companies, from asking people, for example, in meetings, what surprised you last week, which allows people to spot the unexpected moments, to us as individuals, asking questions differently or behaving differently, that can really help us have more serendipity. And I think what you mentioned earlier, this whole idea of how we frame the world, that's a big one, right? Because it's so much about how we look at the world, and it almost like becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? There's a lot of experiments, for example, that show that if you consider yourself to be lucky, you tend to become luckier because you see things like money in the street. You start seeing, things that you didn't see before because you start opening your eyes to it. And so it's a fascinating thing how we can essentially cultivate more of that luck if we open our eyes to it.
Wonderful. And you are the co-founder of Leaders on Purpose organization. You just conducted many interviews with the world leading CEOs as well. So you just got there also case studies and best practices probably, and then combine everything in the book. And your book has been actually shortlisted for many prizes. I have seen it on the net when I was doing the research. I think people are very keen on learning about that topic. Especially reframing should happen all the time. Isn't it? That's also another important part of the issue. If we do reframe only one time, we may miss another opportunity in the future. So reframing and relabeling the whole thing in our minds should be a kind of sustainable process in our lives, in every individual's life.
Absolutely. And that's actually, Gamze, to exactly your point, there's this amazing organization I've been working with in Cape Town, the Cape Flats. It's a very impoverished area. And, imagine that's an area, we a lot of times here talk about budget restraints and things, but, they've been like having budget constraints for a very long time, like in a very rough environment. And, there's a lot we can learn from them for kind of budget constrained environment. And one thing they did is, so essentially it's people who come out of the local community and they set up a very simple low cost education methodology. So, 10 steps to use social media to build a business or things like that. And then they go into other communities. And instead of asking, what do you need, right? What resources do you need? They ask, what is already here and how can we make the best out of it? There's an old garage, fantastic. That could be a training center. There's a former drug dealer, fantastic. That person will be very creative. That person will have a lot of social capital. And if we can turn them into a teacher, we can turn a whole community around. The point here is that they use a lot of kind of different practices to incentivize people to always think about what is it already that we have here so that we don't have to write a budget, but actually we can make the best out of what's already here. So for example, if you would, organize an event and you need 10 chairs, right? Like our first thought then is, okay, great. Like we don't have chairs here. So let's order them from Amazon and then let's put in a budget request, but in their model, you first have to answer two questions. One question is, do you really need the chairs, or can people sit on the floor, or can they, sit on a bench or something? And if you really need the chairs, then is there someone around you, maybe the restaurant next door, that can give you the chairs because they are closed at the time, and so you can make the best out of what is here already. And so if you apply that to every area, like if you apply that to a bank that thinks, oh, we have to close down because, the cashier, the people on the cashier desk, we don't need them anymore because there's an ATM machine that can do that. Yeah, but maybe they could be a financial trainer, and maybe the old office could become a training center, right? And so it's really that idea of saying, if we think about what we already have and make the best out of it, that is actually where a lot of serendipity comes, because you start connecting the dots differently. And to your point, like one of the things that I found fascinating in our work with Leaders on Purpose, so one of the things we did there was to say, okay, let's look at the most successful companies in the world. Companies like MasterCard, Danone, and other companies that have done really interesting work about how you can be successfully financially, but also have some kind of impact in the world. And then let's try to understand what they do differently. And one of the things that they are really good at, across the board, is that they are really good at saying, we have an approximate sense of direction. So if you're a MasterCard, you might say something like, we want to get 500 million people into the financial system, because previously the poor, for example, didn't have access to the financial system. So here's a way we can help them to get access to the financial system. So you have a North Star and certain idea of where you're going, but you might not necessarily exactly know yet how you get there. And so in a way, if they can portray, we have a sense of direction, but we have to figure out part of the strategy, that is the kind of humility that a fast-changing world needs. Because I think traditionally, leaders were always thinking that they have to show exactly the strategy, like every day, every step along the way. But what it does is, in a fast-changing world, it just gives you lots of credibility, because you will constantly have to rearrange your strategy. And we saw that here in the United States, where when COVID happened, right? When COVID happened, early in the year, like February, March, a lot of the governors, so the people responsible for the different states who are, leaders in their own rights, they were saying, yeah, you know what, we will have an exact timetable when we will open up again, because they closed down first. And they said, yes, exactly on whatever, May 15th or something, we will open up again. And so they gave an exact timetable without knowing even which information they would have by then, right? Which is the old school leadership style. And then what the Governor Cuomo here did in New York, he at the beginning missed a little bit of the trend, but then essentially he said, you know what? I have two principles. So I have a North Star, which is economic and public safety. Here's an approximate timeline, but I tell you already now that if we get new information, then we will revise the timeline. I tell you this already now. And by telling people that, and by bringing them on the journey that if there is unexpected COVID clusters or something, that then they have to revise it, he gained a lot of trust and credibility, because he gave a sense of direction, but at the same time also had the humility to say, you know what, we cannot know exactly when we can do that. And so the other leaders lost credibility because they had to constantly revise the timeline or had to hide the data. And so I think that is kind of like what we saw also in our work, that the most kind of successful leaders are able to show authority by showing approximately where we're going, but also then bringing people on board to say, how do we work together on strategy that allows us to be open to the unexpected? Because that is when serendipity starts to happen. Because then is, when you're a brewery, for example, you were selling to restaurants your alcohol, right? And then you realize, oh my God, you know what? We still have the alcohol, but the restaurants are closing down, but maybe we can use that to produce hand sanitizer, right? But that's usually not the leadership that comes up with that idea. It's usually employees in the room. And so I think it's really from the purpose-driven work, a lot of the insights that coming in are really around this idea. We need to combine sense of purpose or sense of direction with the idea of we have to be open to what's emerging.
I think that's the VUCA world. That's the term. VUCA world is very much applicable to that situation right now. And pandemic also taught us how to cope with that, like on daily basis, in every hour even. Everything keeps changing. So you need to adjust yourself, your purpose, your activities accordingly. It's a great conversation. I would love to actually discuss more about it, but unfortunately our time is so limited. I would like to have a final question. Do you have some final messages to the audience, to the companies, employees and employers in terms of how they can use the serendipity factor as a mindset and develop that mindset in their own entity? Yeah,
I mean, that mindset really is about saying, how do we turn uncertainty from a threat into an ally, right? So how do we essentially, I think in a fast-changing world, what's happening a lot with a lot of employees, with a lot of leaders, there's a lot of anxiety, right? There's a lot of anxiety in terms of, oh my God, how can we plan for the future? What can we do? And, if we see that as something that is just threatening us, then it brings us a lot of anxiety. But if we see it as not as an imperfection, but as actually something that there is an opportunity in all of this uncertainty, because that is essentially how entrepreneurship has always worked like this, that if you have uncertain, ambiguous moments, that is where the most interesting innovation comes. That is where the most interesting invention comes. But also, of course, that can be very threatening. I mean, we've had a lot of, throughout my life, I've had I faced bankruptcy with companies, I faced other things. And, in those moments, and I think that is one of the key messages, in those moments, it really depends on our reaction to the unexpected. It is, Viktor Frankl, the wonderful gentleman who and psychotherapist who survived the Holocaust, he always had this wonderful notion, right, that we cannot always influence the situation, right? But what we can influence is our reaction to it. And that reaction to it, that essentially shapes our liberty, our freedom, and our serendipity kind of that we can have. And I think that is really kind of the core message, to say, you know what, like, we can build that muscle for the unexpected by, you know, the way we look at the world, the way we ask questions, the way we set up practices and rituals. And by doing this, that enables us then to live a life that is more purpose-driven and joyful, but also makes companies more successful. Because, to your point, right, you can't survive in a world that is fast changing so fast if you just have these rigid templates that are so old school. And so it's really about reinventing that and saying, okay, how can we build on the old? How can we treasure the old, right? Because there's a lot of great things that old school leadership has, but then at the same time say, how can we, you know, pepper that up by essentially getting ready for that new world.
Right. Thank you so much. Those are great insights, and hope to meet you soon after the pandemic somewhere. Thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you so much, Gamze.